Alright, this video is going to cover Chapter 7 of Improving Vocabulary Skills. So before we go through it, I recommend that you get the book out and you can follow along and fill in the answers as we go through this. But let's read through these words first and take a guess as the parts of speech. So the first one is degenerate, and that sound there at the end, 8, is a clue. Implausible, the IBLE, is a clue as to the part of speech. Incoherent, the ENT is sort of a clue. Intercede, intricate, and that's cut with it, not eight, so that's a clue. Sanctuary, scrutiny, sinister, suffice, and vulnerable, and that's a clue, the ABLE. So let's look at this first one, and this is degenerate, and again this is ending in that 8 sound, making it a verb. Mr. Friedman's family was called to the nursing home when the old man's condition began to degenerate. It was feared he didn't have long to live. Mel's relationship with his parents degenerated when he dropped out of school against their wishes and became a bartender. So what degenerate means is to get worse. If we look at this, word, it's got a couple of word parts here. The D is the same as like in decrease. So we have decrease and increase. So increase means to go up, decrease means to go down. In this case, D is attached to generate, and generate means to make something, right? Or in a sense to grow. You can hear people talking about generating income, meaning making more money, making more income. So degenerate has the opposite meaning, is like the opposite of making something. So in this case, it means making something worse. So we use it in a couple of ways. We use it in terms of like physical health. Like in the first one, you see the old man's condition began to degenerate, meaning that he physically started getting sicker and sicker. But we can also use it in terms of relationships, right? That if a relationship degenerates, means that the relationship is getting worse and worse, not as good. Our next word here is implausible, and this one ends in IBLE, which makes it an adjective. As implausible as it may sound, southern Florida sometimes does get snow. Insurance companies hear such implausible excuses for auto accidents as, "I hit the telephone pole when I was blinded by the lights of a flying saucer." So implausible means unbelievable. And again, we can take this word apart a little bit. The "im" at the beginning is just like impossible, meaning not, and it's connected to the word plausible. What plausible means is it means it's believable, meaning that it, not necessarily that it did happen, but it's possible that it did happen. When we say that something is implausible, it means like there's no possible way that could happen. So for example, in the first example, it says as implausible as it seems. It actually snows in southern Florida. It means it's hard to imagine there actually being snow in southern Florida because it's such a warm part of the country. In the second example, it says these excuses are implausible because it's hard to believe that you were blinded by a flying saucer, that something like that, something that even exists. Our next word here is incoherent, and this is also an adjective. If Mitch doesn't get some sleep soon, he'll become completely incoherent. He's so tired, he's already having trouble expressing his thoughts clearly. My sister talks a lot in her sleep, but she's so incoherent then that we can never figure out what she's saying. Incoherent means unclear. And by unclear, we're not talking about unclear in terms of vision, but we're talking about unclear in terms of it's not something that you can understand. So if we look at this, again, we can sort of take apart the word. We have in, which is the same as in impossible, meaning that it means not. But we have coherent. And coherent actually comes from the word cohere. Those of you guys who remember your biology classes, one of the properties of water is that it's coherent. And what that means is that it sticks together. It sticks together and it holds a shape. So incoherent means that the parts of it together don't make any sense. So in the first example, um, well, let me give you a different example and then I'll come to this one. One of the times that people become incoherent is if they're really, really drunk or really high on drugs. So they can be talking and you can understand the words that they're saying, but it's completely unintelligible. You can't understand the meaning of what they're saying. In the first example, when we get really, really tired, uh, we try to talk, but people can't understand us because our minds are so cloudy that we can't put together a sentence that makes sense. In the second example, my wife does this, and she says that I do it too in my sleep. Is that when you talk in your sleep, it's not clear, because the person who's listening to it is not inside your head, so they don't know what the dream is about. So there's no way for them to understand what you're saying. It doesn't make any sense. Um, the next word here is intercede, and this one is a verb. When the principal said Harry couldn't play in Friday's football game, the coach interceded, hoping to change the principal's mind. Inez's parents refused to come to her wedding until her brother interceded and persuaded them to come along after all. So what intercede means is to plead for someone. And if you don't know what plead means to ask for something. So intercede against, we can look at the parts of this and we see the first word part is inter. It's not just the in. It's not like the other two words, like incoherent, meaning not. It's actually inter. And inter is, you have this in other words like interview or international. And what inter means is between. So when we talk about international, it means it's between two or more nations. So in this case of intercede, what it means is that there's some problem going on between two people or two sides, and the person who intercedes is the third person that comes in, who comes in between the two people who have the problem. In general, when we talk about interceding, the goal is to solve some sort of problem, to fix some sort of problem, or to change someone's mind. So in the first example, the problem is that Harry wasn't allowed to play football because the principal said that he couldn't. So the coach is coming in between the two of them, trying to solve the problem one way or the other. In the second example, the parents and the daughter, they have the problem, and then her brother is the one who intercedes, who comes in the middle to help out. Our next word here is intricate. And we'll notice with this pronunciation is that even though it ends in ate, it's not pronounced ate. And generally, well, I think pretty much always that means it's either an adjective or a noun, but it's not a verb. So War and Peace is a long, intricate novel that weaves together the detailed life stories of many individuals. It's amazing to see the intricate gold and silver jewelry that ancient Indians made with only simple tools. It's obviously required great patience and skill to create such complex ornaments. What intricate means is complicated, but it doesn't mean complicated in the way that like a math problem is complicated, or calculus is complicated. Intricate is normally talking about something that is complicated because it has a lot of parts to it. It's often used when you're talking about like paintings or jewelries or things that you can say. For example, uh, I'm trying to think of an example. My mother is into sewing things by hand, and she sews designs on pieces of cloth. So, for example, right now I have in my living room two pictures of flowers that she did, but I would say that they're very intricate because they're very detailed. They have very small details and differences to them. So if we look at these examples, War and Peace is a famous novel. I believe it's a Russian novel. I've never read it. It's a very, very long novel, maybe over 1,000 pages long. Um, but we say that it's intricate because it has lots of different parts to it. So there's lots of different characters in it. And so when it says the author weaves together, it means that he connected together all of these different stories of different people's life. But intricate means it's complicated because there's a lot of detail to it. Our next word here is sanctuary, and this is a noun. Old unused trains in Grand Central Station serve as a nighttime sanctuary for some of New York City's homeless. When the house full of children becomes too noisy, Ned finds the laundry room to be a sanctuary, a place where he can read in quiet. So a sanctuary is a shelter, but normally it means more than just a shelter, because a house is a shelter, but it's not necessarily a sanctuary. A sanctuary is a place where either you go to find protection, or it's a place where you go to find peace or quiet or something like that. So one of the common places that are often thought of as sanctuaries are churches. So, for example, during the Middle Ages, 500-600 years ago, if you were fighting with, if you were a country, or if you were a person who was fighting with someone else, you might run to the church to find sanctuary, meaning that people wouldn't go in there and fight you. It was a place of safety. I don't know how many of you guys played tag as children, but we always used to have a place that we called base. So if you got to that place, you had sanctuary, meaning nobody could tag you. Say if you were touching that tree, nobody could tag you. So a sanctuary can be a building or a place, but it can also be just sort of generally a place that you go to find peace. For some people, churches or mosques or temples are sanctuaries, because when they go there, they feel protected or removed from all of the problems in the world or in their life. But for other people, a sanctuary might be something that is outside, like a beach or something along those lines that is peaceful for them. Okay, so our next word here is scrutiny, and this one is also a noun. Um, Store security guards give careful scrutiny to people carrying large bags, since the bags may be used for shoplifting. Before being published, a book comes under the scrutiny of a proofreader who examines it for grammar and spelling errors. Scrutiny means attention, but it means careful attention. It actually comes from the verb to scrutinize, which means to look at carefully, normally to find mistakes or to find problems. So, one of the things now, if you go to the airport, they say that there's just sort of random security checks. But I haven't been stopped for them, but I've heard from other people who have like Muslim names and who are dark skinned, that oftentimes, if you're flying while Muslim, you get more scrutiny, meaning that people are paying more attention to you and looking at you more carefully because they're suspicious of you, because they think that you might do something. The same is true, for oftentimes for people who are minorities, so Hispanic or Black people. They might get more scrutiny. In the news recently, there's this stuff about Black Lives Matter, and there's certainly evidence that if you're Black, and you're driving a car, you're more likely to be stopped, than if you're white. And I don't know in terms of being Hispanic, but I imagine the same would be true. So scrutiny really means attention, but specifically attention with the goal of finding a problem, that's there or not there. Next word here is sinister. And even though this one ends in ER, and well, not most, but a lot of ER words are nouns, this one's actually an adjective. In the movie, a mad scientist thought up the sinister scheme of releasing the deadly virus. His evil plot failed when he died from the virus himself. The creepy novel, The Boys from Brazil, tells of a sinister plot to clone dozens of copies of Adolf Hitler, who would then take over the world. So what sinister means, evil. So to describe something as sinister, has the meaning of that it seems like it's going to be dangerous or harmful, to other people. So sometimes you hear people talking about like sinister looking clouds in the sky, and we wouldn't necessarily say those are evil because clouds can't be good or evil, but we could say they're sinister because they're threatening, or they look like they are going to do harm to someone. So when we talk about something sinister, we're talking about something that is harmful, to people or to a situation. Our next word here is suffice, and this one's a verb. The amount of research you've done may suffice for a high school term paper, but not for a college essay. I forgot to buy something for lunch tomorrow, but the leftover meatloaf will suffice. What suffice means is to be adequate or to be enough. So the word adequate means okay. It means enough for a certain purpose. So when we say that something will suffice, it doesn't mean that it's great. It doesn't mean that it's super, but it means that it's good enough, for doing the job. It's good enough for that certain situation. So in the first example, we say, doing this certain level of research is good enough in high school, but it's not good enough in college. So it's good for that level, but not for the higher level. In the second example, saying leftover meatloaf will suffice. This is a meal that isn't like, it's not going to be the top lunch that the person wants, but it's good enough. It's good enough for the certain situation. And our last word here is vulnerable, and this ends in able, making it an adjective. Homes in heavily wooded areas are especially vulnerable to termites. Because they tend to have brittle bones, the elderly are vulnerable to fractures. Now here the word it uses is open, but be really, really careful about just memorizing the word open, because vulnerable means open to harm, and it's normally open to harm by something specific. So in the first example, it's saying woods in heavily wooded areas are especially vulnerable to termites. Termites are a kind of insect that eat wood. So if you live in a place where there's a lot of wood around you, there's going to be more termites. So it's more likely that your house will be open to being hurt by these insects. In the second example, it's saying when you're older, your bones are brittle, which means that they break more easily. They're not as solid as when you're younger. So they're vulnerable, or they're open to fractures, which means breaks of the bone. We often talk about, you know, in society, we say that certain people are more vulnerable than others. And what that means is that they're more open to being harmed. Not that they want to, but that they have less protection. So people who are poor, we would consider them to be vulnerable. People who have mental or physical handicaps, oftentimes, not all of the times, but oftentimes we think about them being vulnerable because it's easier to hurt them. Children are considered to be vulnerable because it's easy to hurt them. So I don't have my book with me, but I do recommend that for this word you look at the longer definition rather than just this one, because if you just think of it as open, you're very likely to make mistakes with it. All right, great. Well, good luck doing the questions, and I'll see you in class. Take care. Bye.